Hello, I'm Mark Nanaman. Today I'm going to talk about how we can track attendance in a Teams online meeting using Graph API, a custom connector, and Power Automate. So first, let's take a look here inside of Power Automate and let's see what we have available to us for Microsoft Teams. So I'm here adding an action to a flow, and I'm looking at all the actions we have under the Microsoft Teams connector. And if you look, there's only really one that pertains to meetings. It's this create a Teams meeting. So we can create a meeting, but we cannot get a meeting and get data about a meeting, including attendance. Now, I will note that there is this send a Microsoft Graph HTTP request action under the Teams connector, and we can use it to send requests to endpoints in Graph API that aren't in the Teams connector yet. Here, unfortunately, I'm going to demonstrate that it doesn't work. So here I've pasted in an endpoint that uses an actual Teams join URL to filter on to pull up a record for an online meeting. This uses the online meetings endpoint. And we'll just go ahead and give it a try. And we see if we try to use one of the online meeting endpoints, we get an error. It tells us it's a bad request. The error message itself will say the URI path is not a valid graph endpoint. Path is neither absolute nor relative, or the resource/object is not supported. And then it gives us here, this is the important part, it gives us a list of the accepted resources and objects. The allowed resources are Teams, me, users, and the accepted objects are channels, chats, installed apps, messages, and pinned messages. However, we need to be able to access online meetings. The good news, though, is there is a way to do it. We'll have to register an app in Microsoft Entra and then set up a custom connector in Power Automate, and then we will be able to use the Graph API endpoints for online meetings. So first, we should take a look at the Graph API reference. So here I am at learn.microsoft.com, looking at the Microsoft Graph REST API version 1.0, and here I've got the Get Online Meeting endpoint. It's over here underneath Teamwork and Communications, Calls and Online Meetings, and Online Meeting right here. So I'm looking at the Get Online Meeting endpoint. The important things that we need to look at is we need to look at permissions and then, of course, the endpoints that we can use. One thing to note is you can either use the endpoint that starts with me, so that would be your users' online meetings, and there's also the version down here where you can do users and then user ID. Another important thing to note is there's an endpoint here that can pull a meeting using the meeting ID. However, the meeting ID is kind of hard to find. What ends up being most useful is using this online meetings filter, and then it filters by the join web URL. So that's the link that people use to join the meeting. And you can get that, you can copy that from your meeting manually, and you can also find it using a API to list, a Graph API that lists the events on your calendar. So every event on your calendar that is an online meeting in Teams will have the join URL in that object. And so in a Power Automate flow, we could dynamically list our calendar events and filter them accordingly, and then dynamically pull that join URL out of the calendar events and pass it to this Graph API endpoint to get the actual meeting ID that we need. The permissions we're going to need: online meetings.read for the delegated, online meetings.read.all for the application. The next API we need to look at is this meeting attendance report. The attendance report object is pretty simple. It has an ID, has a meeting start and end time here. It has the count of the total participants, and you can also expand it to get attendance records, which is what we're after in this case. We need a list of everyone who attended the meeting and how long they were in the meeting. The permissions for this endpoint we will need to look at are online meeting artifact.read.all, online meeting artifact.read.all for the application and the delegated. The endpoint that we'd be interested in is this users, user ID, online meetings, online meeting ID, attendance reports. So the meeting ID we get from the API we just looked at, where we're looking up the online meeting by the join URL, that will return an object that has an ID property that can go here dynamically to pull the attendance reports. And once we get the attendance reports, we can pull the ID from them to get the attendance records. So let's look at that next. So here we are looking at attendance record. The object for the attendance record looks kind of like this. It has an array inside of each. It'll be an array of each participant in the meeting, and then it'll have intervals for each one. So it'll be another nested array within each item there, showing the date and time they logged into the meeting and the duration. So if someone logs in for 5 minutes, then logs out, and then logs in a few minutes later for a couple more minutes, and then logs out, there'll be 2 items in there. Each one will show how long they're in for each session. And then there'll be a total attendance in seconds property that will show how many seconds total they were in the meeting for all their join sessions. It'll also have their email address and then their identity record, which will show their ID and their name and everything. The permissions for this action will be online meeting artifact.read.all again for both the application and the delegated. The endpoint here looks similar. It's users, user ID, online meetings, meeting ID, attendance reports, and then the attendance report ID, and then this /attendance records, and that'll pull the attendance records we need. So to get started building our solution, we can log into the Microsoft Entra Admin Center, just entra.microsoft.com. And then we need to look for our applications right here on the left blade. Click on that and then click on App Registrations. I'm going to click New Registration, and we're going to give our app registration a name. We'll call it Teams Online Meeting Attendance Tracking. I'll leave the account type set to the default accounts in this organizational directory only. And I'll go ahead and leave the redirect URL blank for now. If you want to, you could put in like a Postman redirect right there so that you could test this in Postman. Click Register. Okay, now that our app is created, let's go to API permissions. And let's start adding those permissions we looked at earlier. Click on Add Permission underneath API Permissions. We're going to select Microsoft Graph. We're going to click Delegated Permissions. And we're going to search for Online Meeting. And if we remember, there was Online Meeting Artifact. We needed this one, and we also needed Online Meetings. And you want to follow the rule of least privilege, the principle of least privilege. We've only got one option here for the artifact, the read all. And since we're only reading here, we're not updating anything. We're going to do the online meetings.read. Hit Add Permissions. And there they are. Now, another thing I didn't mention is we might want to use the Graph API to list calendar events. So let's just go ahead and add a permission to do that. I didn't show you in the Graph API, but if you look up there in the reference, you'll see the permission you need and the endpoint for listing calendar events. So let's go to calendar, and we'll just do calendars.read. All right. And I don't think we need to grant admin consent. I'll go ahead and hit yes. There we go. Another thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add a secret for our client credentials. So under Overview, click on Client Credentials, and let's click New Client Secret. I'll just type something in here for a description. Teams Online Meetings Tracking App Secret. We'll leave the expiration to the recommended 6 months. Remember that it's going to expire in 6 months. Okay, and now we have our secret, and this will only be visible for a little bit, so go ahead and copy it. You can save it in a notepad or something. While I'm here, I'm going to assign an owner, so I'm going down here to Owners, and I click Add Owners, and I'll add myself. And for the next part, let's go ahead and start making our custom connector. So we'll go to make.powerautomate.com and look for custom connectors over here on the left. If you can't find it, hit more and just go digging around. It's there somewhere. And then we're going to click New Custom Connector. Create from blank. And let's give it a name. I'm going to call it Teams Online Meeting Attendance. I'm going to hit Continue. Oh, and it's too long, huh? So let's say Teams Meeting Attendance. How about that? So here we are. And one thing I'll note is we can upload an image here for our connector, which is a good idea. However, it's best to wait until you're pretty much done with the connector because Power Automate tends to lose it every time you update, and then you just got to re-upload it and save it again. So I'll just wait until the end to update that. So we want to give this a description. We'll call it custom connector for calling Teams online meeting graph API endpoints for online meeting attendance tracking. Leave the scheme as HTTPS. I might have said too many T's. And here for host, we want to put graph.microsoft.com. And we'll leave the base URL as the /. And now we'll continue to security. We need to change the no authentication to OAuth 2.0. And you want your identity provider to be the generic OAuth 2. So now we need to start plugging in some data. So we want to use that secret that we saved earlier. And then next we'll do the client ID. So we'll go back to Entra, click on Overview. We're going to find our application client ID right here. Click the copy. Now the authorization URL, token URL, and refresh URLs are all standard, but you can find them in Entra. All you got to do is click on this little endpoints button, and then what you're looking for is your authorize and then your token right here. I said they're standard, but they do have your tenant ID in the middle. But you basically use the same endpoints for all your custom connectors that are using Entra apps registrations in Entra. So I'm going to paste in my authorization. And then I also need to copy the token endpoint and make sure you're getting the OAuth 2.0 v2. And the token will also be used for the refresh. So the refresh is what the custom connector is going to call when the token is expiring to get a new one. Scope is important. You need to put in offline access here so that it will be able to refresh that token. Otherwise your connection is just going to expire like every 15, 30 minutes or so, and you'll have to re-sign into it or fix it in your Power Automate connections every time you want the flow to run, which is no good. So here for scope, I'm going to put in offline_access and user.read. Another thing I'll note, the client ID, I believe you can use environmental variables to, I believe you can type in a reference to an environmental variable here in the custom connector setup. So that might be something you want to consider doing so that your client ID isn't exposed right here. Okay, and at this point, we're going to go ahead and click Create Connector so that we can get our redirect URL down here. So as I was saying, you want to go ahead and create your connector or save it at this point because you need to grab this redirect URL. And we need to put that back into Microsoft Entra for our app. So we copy this, hit the copy button. It doesn't seem to animate, but I think it's working. Another thing I'll note is for whatever reason, when you save this or update it, it switches the identity provider to Azure Active Directory and the client secret blanks out. But that's fine. We don't want to use this Azure Active Directory. We want to use the generic OAuth. It's fine though. it just changes for whatever reason and it looks like it's not filled out yet, but it's fine. As long as you set it up properly before you hit save or create, it'll be fine. And it just blanks out your client secret so that it can't be read, I guess. But everything works fine. So let's go back here to our app in Entra. So we want to be in Microsoft Entra and we want to have our app registration open that we just created. And we want to look for the redirect URLs. So we can find them here in under overview and then look for add a redirect URL next to redirect URLs and just go ahead and click on that. And this is how Microsoft will pass the login pop-up window to you to set up the connection. So when we click on that, it takes us down here to authentication and look at supported account types. We'll go ahead and leave it as a default accounts in this organizational directory only. And what we need to do is we need to go up here and click on add platform. We'll click on web. And then here's where it wants the redirect URL. We'll paste in that redirect we received from our custom connector. We don't need to worry about the logout URL. And down here, we select the token that we want. Select the tokens you would like to be issued by the authorization endpoint. And we'll go ahead and check access tokens used for implicit flows and click configure. And there we go. If we make any other changes here on this page, you'll have to click save down here to get them to take effect, but this is all good. And now at this point, we can go back to our custom connector and we can start adding some of these actions that we want to use with the Graph API endpoints. So to do this, we'll click on definition and we'll just click new action. Now the first action I want to add is the one to list events on a calendar so that we can find the join URLs for our online meetings. So I'm going to call this summary here. What I'm going to name this, I'm going to name it list calendar events. And we'll just call this get events. The visibility, we want to make sure we set this to important or advanced, but I'll set it to important so it always shows up in the list when we search for these in Power Automate. And at this point, we can start setting up the endpoint, but first we need to find that in Graph API. Here in the Graph API reference, I'm just going to scroll up and look for calendars. And I'm going to click on event. And I'll just click on list here. And here are our options for endpoints. I'll just go ahead and do the me calendar events. We'll click this get, paste in me calendar events, and then we'll hit import. So there, we've got that. We could also, if we want, we could set up a response schema so that it's easy to dynamically select data from the response in a Power Automate flow. To do that, we need to get an example response. So let's go back to the Graph API and see if they have an example response listed there. So here in Graph API, we see that we do have an example response given. So let's go ahead and just copy this portion of it. After we've copied the sample response from the Graph API reference, we can click here back into our custom connector and we can go down to response and click the import from sample option. And then we'll just paste it over here in this blade that pops out on the right. And hit import. And there we go. It has pulled in all the details from the sample. Now we can click back. Okay, and next we can just go ahead and click new action so we can add our next action. And this one will be the action to get the online meeting. So I'll call it get online meeting. I'll call it lookup online meeting from join URL. The operation will just do get online meeting. And we'll give it important visibility. And then we'll click import from sample for the request. And then over here, we'll look it up over here in our API reference. So let me just look up online meeting. We'll click get. And I want to use this one right here. This is the get users with the filter for the join URL. So over here, back in Power Automate, let's set the verb to get, and then we can paste in that URL we copied. Oops, and you got to be careful because it's so easy to get it to collapse. Okay, if you like click anywhere outside of the box, it'll collapse. So let's clean this up a bit. I need to get rid of this get. And anything that is in the URL that you want to be dynamically supplied, basically as an input, you do want to keep it in the squigglies inside your curly braces. So I've got user ID here. Microsoft already has it in the curly braces for us, so that's good. And then here at this point, this is going to be a little tricky, this filter thing. So it will basically delete this out, but it'll keep the filter. But let's go ahead and copy this portion so that we can use it later to set a default. So I'm going to select that, hit copy, and I'll go ahead and hit import. And so now it is imported the sample. As you see here, it's stripped off the filter part. It did keep this user ID in the curly braces, and it put it down here as a path input option. So you have user ID here. Let's go ahead and click on that and click edit. This is important. You need to set these to make sure they're required, and you need to make their invisibility important. We don't want it to be none. We can put in a default value if we wanted to. Okay, once we do that, click back here. Sometimes you want to click update connector, but anytime you make an edit here, it saves automatically. You just got to hit back. And now let's scroll back down and look for filter. Click edit. And here we'll need to give some instructions. And also under default value, I'm going to paste that portion I copied here. Now it won't let me save like this with the URL encoded, HTML encoded spaces. So just take out the %20s and just replace them with a space. It'll work just fine, and leave it like that. And let's say we'll call this filter by join URL. For description, let's put filter by join URL, replace join web URL with meeting join URL. And I'll actually go ahead and take out the curly braces here. So the idea will be when we access this in Power Automate, the default value will show this right here, and we'll just need to drop the dynamic reference to the join URL that we retrieved earlier. We'll drop that right in here inside of the single quotes. And we'll set the visibility to important. And now we can hit back. Next, we'll look for our attendance reports. So let's go over here in the Graph API reference and let's look up meeting attendance report. We'll go to list, and this is the one we want right here. So I'm going to copy this. Then we'll go back to Power Automate. We'll click New Action and set this up as we've set up the other ones. set visibility important, and click import principal. Paste the URL, set the forget. Hit import. And again, we need to click into these and click edit on the parameters to set their visibility. And support as well. And another thing, I forgot to do it on the Get Online Meeting, but we'll see if we can do it here for the reports. Again, we can do the Add Default Response. So let's look here in the Graph API, and let's see if we've got a example response. Here we have an example response, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this portion of it. Click here, Add Default Response. I'll paste it in here and hit import. Let's click here and see if it worked successfully. Okay, yes, we've got our properties there. I'm going to go ahead and click back into the Get Online Meeting. And let's look for the example response. And we'll copy this portion of it. Back here in Power Automate, I will scroll down to the response section, click Add Default Response, paste it in, hit import. Now, if you're not interested in all the data points, you could remove them. Even before you paste them, you could just delete out the ones you don't care about, so that you only paste the ones you do care about. Mainly all we need here really is the ID. Now we can add the action to get the attendance records. It's a little confusing. We have attendance reports and then attendance records. The attendance records are the ones that are going to show each user and how long that they were in the meeting. And so that is what we're really after. We have to go through all these steps to find the list of people and how long they were in the meeting. And it will look like this right here. It'll have each email address, the ID and display name of the person, and then their attendance intervals, their join and leave times, and the duration in seconds. And then it should also have a total attendance in seconds right there. We will copy this. We'll just go ahead and name it over here again. Get attendance records. This is important. Import from sample request. Paste in here. Change the word get. So we'll do this. Make sure it's good. Users, user ID, meeting ID, report ID. Looks good. Hit import. And again, we need to go ahead and update these. I'll show you a little trick we can do. We can go here to Swagger Editor, because it does get old editing all those parameters. So for here in the Swagger Editor, I will expand this. We can look for one of these that we've already done. I will look for, let's look for user ID. Okay, here we go. Parameters, name, user ID, in path, required true, visibility important. So that's basically the part I need to add. So I'm going to copy that. I'm copying that XMS visibility important line. And now let's look for the last one we added. So here's the last path we added with the attendance records. And here we've got the parameters section here. So here are those three parameters it just parsed out that I was about to click into each one, click edit, go in, change the visibility, go back, hit the next one, change visibility, go back. And what I can do is go into Swagger Editor and I can just find them here and just paste that visibility line, hopefully. Although, okay, now it's happy. So let me try it a different way here. Let's try it. Let's go all the way over here. There we go. So like that one better. And now I'll go down to this last parameter, the report ID, which is important and needs to be, okay, that didn't work. So let me put a cursor here and hit enter. Okay, now it's happy. So now all I got to do to save this is just toggle the Swagger editor back off. And we'll just double check that that worked. I'm going to click on this report ID, hit edit. And what I'm checking here is that the invisibility is set to important, which it is because we updated it in that Swagger editor. We can also add our names here. That's another thing we could have done in the Swagger editor, but we'll go ahead and do it here. Let's call this report ID. And for the sake of brevity, I'll just leave the other ones as they are. I won't mess with setting the names on them. The last thing we need to do here is add in the default response, copy the body, the JSON body, add default response, paste it in, hit import. All right, at this point, let's go ahead and make sure we click Update Connector to save this. After it is saved, let's just go ahead and skip on over to Test. And let's go ahead and give this a test. So let's hit New Connection. And it's going to pop up here. And again, this comes from that redirect URL we supplied to Entra on the app registration. So it tells Entra where to send the pop-up. And it went ahead and created our connection for us. Okay. All right, the moment of truth. Let's see if this works. We'll go ahead and select Get Events from our operations and hit Test Operation. All right, so we got a failure. Now, what could be causing this? Let's see the message, invalid version, me. Invalid version. Okay, so that is a hint about what's wrong. If I go back here to the Graph API reference and I just look at the top section of the API v1.0 reference, click on Overview, and we just look for this right here called the v1.0 endpoint. Notice that it goes graph.microsoft.com/v1.0, and then you've got the rest of your URL. So this right here is necessary, but we did not put it in our custom connector anywhere. Was that an honest mistake on my part, or did I skip that just to teach you how to go backwards and fix things? I'll let you decide. But to fix this, we can click here on General, Step 1, and we look down here for the host, graph.microsoft.com, and then the base URL, we've got this slash. If we just add in there the v1.0 and then put another slash, that will solve everything. Another way to solve everything is if we could have left the base URL as a slash, and then we could have gone back here to each of our endpoints and made sure that we updated them to have the v1.0 in them. But since we add it in the general section as the base URL, it gets automatically added in right there. So after we update that, we'll click Update Connector to save the change, and then we'll hop back over to Test and give it another test. And let's try testing again. All right, this time we've got an actual response. This looks good. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to scroll through this response and I'm going to look for the online meeting link. Okay, so here we go. This is what I'm looking for. Online meeting, and then we've got the join URL. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And now we're going to go to this next operation. We'll go ahead and give this one a try. And we need to paste in that join URL right here in our filter. So I hit paste, and I need to make sure to delete out that last quote, and that should be good. I also need to give it a user ID, so let me copy my user ID and post that in there. We'll hit test and scroll down, look at the response. Okay, so we're able to retrieve the online meeting record from that join URL. And now we can get the actual ID of the meeting. We find it right here under the ID property. So I'm going to copy that so I can use it in the next one. So over here, I'm going to paste in that meeting ID I copied into the get attendance record or reports action. And again, I'm going to have to copy in my user ID. Okay, and now we've got the ID for our attendance report, and that is necessary to grab the attendance record. So I copy that, then we go to the next action here, and I paste that in as a report ID. We also need to paste in the meeting ID and the user ID again, only because we're testing it here in the custom connector setup. This will be much easier to fill dynamically in Power Automate. Hit test. Very good. We have our attendance records for our meeting. Now that we've got our custom connector all set up and ready to go, we can upload a picture if we want to. I uploaded this image for Teams that I found online, I think on the Wikipedia page. And I'm going to go ahead and see if I can change the background color. Just put in 6 Fs there. Okay, that'll give us a white background color since it was a PNG. Okay, so that all looks good. And now I will click Update Connector. Once this finishes saving, we can start building our Power Automate flow to actually use our custom connector and Graph APIs to collect attendance records for online meetings. All right, so let's go ahead and create our flow. So I'm going to click Scheduled Cloud Flow, call it Teams Attendance Tracker. Do it every month. No, not month. Do it every day. I am starting my new flow. I'm using a recurrence trigger, but we could just as easily use a manual trigger or some other kind of trigger. To start with, I'm going to get one of these Office 365 user actions to pull in the user ID that I need for myself. So I'm going to use Get My Profile. Next, I'm going to look for my new connector. So I'm going to type in Teams. Of course, the first thing we're going to see is the official Microsoft Teams. If I click over here onto the custom filter, I will see some of my custom connectors. Now these two up here are some tests I did before this video. This one down here with the nice logo for Teams is the one I just created in this video. So I'm going to start with list calendar events. And we have to create a connection, so let's sign in. Okay, so we've got our connection. Now I'm going to do an apply to each. And I'm going to click over here. And since we added in those response schemas in the custom connector builder, we get some options here that we can choose from dynamically. If we hadn't added those schemas in, we could use the Power Automate expressions to manually type those in. So I'll just go ahead and select the body value here, since that will be the array. Let's see if we hover over this. So if you hover over it, you see how it looks. That's what we're saving ourselves the trouble of typing that in. So if I hadn't have added the schemas in the custom connector builder, I would have to click the FX here. And basically I'd have to type in this without the curly braces. So we'd have to grab the output of this action, and then we'd have to select the property we wanted, which would be body/value. Now here we want to grab the join URL. So let's see if we can find that. I'm going to add a compose box to look for that. And we'll click the lightning bolt to see if we have that join URL as an option here. Just type in join. So it didn't find it. Maybe the example that I used from Graph API did not have the online meeting property in there, but I know from experience what it looks like. But you could also run this flow once and look at the example output to find the correct property names to refer to it by. What I can do is I can manually type in here item, ? And then I'll do online meeting / join URL. I'm going off memory here, but I think that's what it is. So I'm going to click add, and I'm going to rename this join URL. Let me look at this. Okay, it did. It did grab the whole thing. So I hover over it just to see if the whole thing's saved. And now let's go ahead and add our next action. I'm going to do the get online meeting. Drop in a user ID. Just type in ID. And then here, the filter by join URL, we need to replace this. So we just click here, get attendance reports. For the ID, we're going to need to grab the ID returned by the get online meeting action. So type in ID, and we're going to grab this one, body/ID. And now we're going to grab our attendance records. Now, unfortunately, we have an array returned from the attendance reports, so it's going to want to create another loop. So we need that meeting ID again, so I'm going to look for body/ID under meeting. And then for report ID, we're going to need to grab the report ID from the get attendance reports action. And this is where we're probably going to create a loop. Get attendance reports ID. Yes, it made another loop, but that's fine. So let's go ahead and publish this and give it a test run. We'll go ahead and hit test, select manual, and hit test. Run flow. Done. So many clicks, just the test, huh? All right, we've got some errors. So it says the meeting ID is null. So let's look and see what happened. Let me click on Get Online Meeting. Let's look at our outputs. So there's a meeting ID right there. So that should be working. So for some reason, it's not properly referencing the meeting ID. So let's look and see why that is. So looking at the output, the online meeting also output an array. It's possible we didn't set up the schema correctly in the custom connector designer and possibly just use the single object and not the whole array. So what I can do is I can just manually key this in. Let's do the body of the online meeting. And then I'm going to do ? Value. And let's do first, because value is an array. So I'm going to grab the first item in the value array, and then I'm going to do ID. Oh, the expression has a problem. Oh, I see what the problem is. I need to put all right, let's try hitting add now. Now let's go ahead and give it a test. Well, we fixed one problem. We've still got another. Oh, yeah. So I fixed the meeting ID reference for this action, but we also have to use meeting ID again down here, and I didn't fix it down there. Fix this. I'm just going to paste in that same reference. And now, ooh, there we go. Finally, we got it working. Looks like we have an error somewhere down the list. I also did not limit this to the meetings. It's pulling every event on my list, so there's probably a certain event on my calendar that doesn't qualify. Yeah, so probably it was some event that doesn't have an online meeting, so it failed there. So we need to, if we use that get events action up here, we need to filter the output of this to anything that has a join URL and use that. And ideally, we'd want to filter it on to one specific meeting. All right, so I've made some changes to this flow. I'll just walk you through them real quick. One thing I did was I added a filter after my list calendar events, and I'm basically just filtering where the online meeting / join URL property is not null, so that I know that I only have actual online meetings coming from my calendar events. I also added a variable, an array variable called array attendance, basically. And here in my loop, where I'm getting the attendance records, I added a select operation to basically pull in some data to create a spreadsheet at the end of this. So the data I'm mapping into the array here is I'm grabbing the name, the email, the total attendance in seconds for each participant, and then I'm also grabbing the attendance in minutes, and it's rounded down minutes, and then the meeting ID, the meeting title, the meeting start time, and the meeting end time. So to grab the minutes, I'm dividing the total attendance in seconds by 60. The meeting ID is grabbed the same way. The meeting title, I'm taking the first meeting return from the get online meetings action, and I'm grabbing the subject property. That's what the property is called. And then I'm grabbing the meeting start time and meeting end time from each attendance report up here. The attendance reports include that information. After that, I use a union action to unite this selection of attendees will create an array. And then I want to combine that with whatever I've already saved in the variable to make a new array that's updated and has all the items from both arrays. And then I update the variable with a set variable action. And I update it with the output of this union action right here. So this is a compose, and I just added an expression here to use the union function on the two arrays that I have. And so the first array is the variable array, and the next one is the select action in the current loop. So that's a way to update, combine all of our actions, all of our arrays that we select into one variable. And then down here, I create a CSV table off of the variable, off of my attendance array variable. And then I just did a simple create file in OneDrive. It'll create the file in OneDrive. Of course, we could have an Excel sheet in Excel Online that we update with this information, or we could send an email report, or we could update a SharePoint list. There are many options of what we could use these Graph API endpoints for. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate this updated Power Automate flow. All right, so our flow has run. And now let's go over here to OneDrive and check for the report. Here's the final CSV report. This has two different meetings in it. Mark's test meeting and then test meeting 0503. And each meeting had two attendees. This one I just joined twice. And then this one right here, I joined it. And then I also used a guest account from my Gmail address to join. And here at the top one, I see that my main account was in there for 63 minutes and my guest account was in the meeting for 20 minutes. So there we go. We have used Graph API, an Entra app registration, and a custom connector in Power Automate to create an automation to track attendance in Teams online meetings. All right, well, there you have it. We successfully created a custom connector in Power Automate to use Graph API endpoints with a Microsoft Entra app registration to build a Power Automate flow that tracks attendance in Teams online meetings. That was kind of a mouthful to say, and there are a lot of steps along the way, but we got it working. So thanks so much for watching the video. If you want to read more about how I did this, you can check out the blog post tutorial in the description below, and I hope you have a great day.